Larson and Dan Long, and today they have 11 locations throughout the Front Range and are continuing to grow. Will you all please join me in welcoming Mr. John Montgomery.
Can you hear me okay? How about now? Can you hear me okay, everybody? Thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is my first presentation on ethics, and it's a long time coming. I actually have a pretty cool story, so hopefully stick around. And there's food that's being served after this, which is actually Mad Greens. So if you haven't had Mad Greens or don't know about Mad Greens, you'll know in about an hour. Actually, what I was going to ask you, since this is my first presentation on ethics, and it really has been about 10 years coming, I want to start doing this at schools. And so at the end, my last slide, I have my email address, and I would like it if you guys would send me any feedback, critical or positive, how I can improve the presentation, because I think what I have to say is important. Obviously, you guys must think ethics is important or you're required because of a grade or a test or a paper, but you're here nonetheless, and we're going to talk as much about my story, and then I'm going to give about 20 minutes of Q&A. I think there's a lot of value in Q&A, so I'm going to devote a lot of time to that. My background, my parents used to live in Greeley, and they both worked for the Monfort, so it's kind of ironic that I'm here speaking at the building today. I was actually born in Alliance, Nebraska, which is not too far from here. I'm a Cornhusker fan, huge Cornhusker fan. I can't get away from it. I lived there until I was about 10 years old. I moved to northern Minnesota and grew up in a town called Bemidji. Has anybody heard of Bemidji? A couple people? Yeah. It's a cool little place to grow up. I ended up going to Bemidji State University, and I got my accounting degree from there. I decided I wanted to be a CPA. I took the test, and I hated it, but I passed it. I can't call myself a CPA. I can say that I passed the test, and it would be unethical to call myself a CPA because you have to be licensed, and I'm not licensed. I decided that when I walked away from being an auditor that I would never ever go back, and that was about 10 years ago, and I haven't gone back. So I took the test. I can answer any questions about that later. Some people are thinking about going to the path. So I passed the exam. My other experience was MBA, which Cassie already alluded to. I went to the University of Colorado, graduated with MBA in 2008. That's sort of my background, my education. As far as work goes, I've got kind of an interesting path. I'll call it my experience because the below part isn't work, but it was one of the best experiences that I've ever had in my life. I started out at Deloitte & Touche as an auditor back in 1998.
I'll switch my style. It's kind of now.
Sorry. So like I was saying, I went to work as an auditor at Deloitte & Touche, thinking that I was going to go the CPA route and that was going to be my life. I didn't last very long. I hated it, and I'll get into that a little bit. I ended up going to Buca de Beppo restaurants. Has anybody ever heard of Buca? Wow, a lot. Good. So Buca is this big, Italian, fun, family-style restaurant concept based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's just this fun, cool place if you haven't been. I think there's a couple of them still in Colorado and around the country. I was their assistant controller, and I was there for a couple years. I loved that job, but I'll get into why I left. After I left, I was going to get out of the business altogether. I was very disillusioned. I decided I was going to take all of my money, put all my stuff in storage, and travel around the world for 6 months. And if you have an itch to do that, I highly recommend that you do. You will learn more about yourself and just life in 6 months than you'll spend in work in 10 years. I still think I learned more in 6 months, and I talk more about that probably than I do about any of my work experience. After I got back to, I went west and came back east and decided I wanted to live in Boulder, and I wanted to continue working at restaurants. So I looked up this little noodle shop that had started called Noodles and Company. I started with them when they had 34 restaurants open, and was their controller. I worked there until 2006, when we had 125. I left, so it was massive growth during that period. It was a lot of fun. Love that job. I kind of got into, so it got to be too big of a corporation for my personal preference. A lot of the Chipotle folks went to Noodles, and it kind of changed the culture and the atmosphere. So I decided I was going to go get my MBA, left to go get my MBA, and was going to get out of restaurants completely. And it's like the mafia. Once you start, you can't leave. It sucks you back in. The whole time I was going to get my MBA, I kept working on different concepts. Illegal Pete's, if you know illegal Pete's, I was doing some work for that concept, and I just couldn't get away. So I came across Magreens. They needed a finance guy. When I started, we had 8 units. Now we have 11. It's a salad-based, sort of fast casual concept. We're growing. We have a tremendous year. People are eating healthier, and we're continuing to see some good success. And I've enjoyed it. I've been there almost 5 years, and I don't see myself leaving anytime soon. So, good job. So, so you guys are fortunate you have Ethics Day. Back when I was going to college, we didn't have anything. I was really racking my brain trying to think if we even had a chapter in a business law textbook that talked about ethics. And I don't really recall ever having a discussion. This is sort of in mid-late 90s. So, for me, it was always like, well, isn't it just common sense? How do you teach it? When I passed my CPA exam, they require you to take a ethics test. And I remember thinking, what a joke that is. I mean, of course, you're going to answer all the proper questions and answer it in a way that's not going to preclude you from becoming a CPA that you studied so hard for. So at the time, that's my quote. I don't know if I really said that in 1999, but I kind of believed it, that how do you teach somebody to sort of do the right things, and that's sort of what they're brought up a certain way, and that should be the way it is. And I got some on-the-job training when I went to UCA, and that's my story today. I'm going to spend the majority of it talking about stuff that I saw, stuff that I participated in, and then ultimately what happened. So, does anybody know about UCA and sort of the issues they were into? They're going bankrupt. But yeah, they went bankrupt, which sort of culminated in all this stuff. So when I was working at Deloitte & Touche, I hated it, like I said. Just didn't enjoy that type of work. But my favorite client was Buca de Beppo. We'd spend 2, 3, 4 weeks a year on a particular client, and I just loved going there. The culture was so fun, and it was the office environment. It's just like it was in the restaurants. And the CFO, pretty much, he was this sort of caricature type person. He was so much bigger than life, and he had so much energy, and he really carried the entire 60, 70 people in that office, and every one of them sort of became infected with his enthusiasm. And so I used to love going there, and he was a Deloitte & Touche guy and an accountant, and I would think, wow, that's who I want to emulate, this guy that is an accountant and a mean accountant, but also has a personality. It's a lot of fun to be around. And so when I decided I was going to leave Deloitte & Touche, I called up the Buca guys, and there's the controller who was sort of a friend of mine. He had worked at Deloitte & Touche previous, and I said, hey, Dan, if there's ever a job that opens up at Buca, I would love the opportunity. And a few weeks went by, and then I get a call back, and they said, yeah, we're ready to bring you on. And they said, you're going to come in, you're the assistant controller, you'll manage our entire accounting staff, which is like 17 people. We're going to pay you X, which I won't tell you what significantly more than I was making, and it was more than my parents made combined. And so I was like, what did I fall into? This is amazing. Of course I'm going to do it. When I got there, that sort of the pay was great and all that, but the perks sort of continued. I was given a gym membership, which now sort of a lot of companies do it. Back then it was kind of a special thing. I had my own parking spot, which is a little sort of like office space. And I also, they built an office for me because there weren't any private offices. And I was 23 years old, so I was much older than some of you folks in here. And I thought I was just, on cloud nine. I couldn't believe my good fortune. And I loved the concept. I loved everything about that job. There was sort of what I call the good old boys network, or good old boys group, which was the CFO, the VP of IT, and the controller, and then myself. And we ranged between, I was the youngest one at 23. I think the CFO was maybe 40, so he was relatively young. And then sort of there was a spread between the rest of the guys. But the four of us, I felt like we sort of ran Buka because the CEO was, he was living in California and he would fly in for a couple days and then go back to California. And so he was sort of CEO from a distance. So the CFO really was the guy running the company, and that group got to do whatever we wanted. We'd go out to lavish dinners, like really expensive dinners, expensive wine. We would get to sit front row at like Timberwolves games, the hockey games, the Vikings games, all in front row. We played basketball every day. We ate lunch every day together. We got to be really, really tight knit group, and it was sort of like a fraternity feel to it. The way that we spent, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but we spent a lot of time in strip clubs. Which, I was 23, those guys were all married. It was a bigger issue for them to be in there probably than me. But it wasn't like, if you go there, it was like the VIP section with the champagne and all of that. I never paid a dime for. It always got taken care of by the CFO, and I never thought anything of it. I just thought that was just part of the deal for working here. And it was very much a work hard, play hard type of work environment. It was about 6 months after I had started, and the controller popped into my office one day. It was about 2 days before we had to do an earnings release for Wall Street. And if you don't know what that is, we were a public company, so we would have to report on how our finances were for the previous quarter. And Wall Street has an estimate of what you should have done based on what you told them in the previous quarter. And if you miss the earnings per share number, your stock will drop. And so the game is to try to prevent that from happening. And so earnings per share is typically in cents. And I remember the controller came in and he said, hey, we need to find 2 cents of earnings per share because we're going to miss Wall Street estimates. And this is the first time I'd ever heard this. I was like, what? What are we going to do? He said, we have to find about $40,000 in net income. I was like, well, how do you find $40,000 in net income? The books are already closed, the quarter already happened. There's 2 ways. You either increase sales or you decrease your expenses. Those are the 2 ways. Well, to fabricate sales it's more complicated, and you have to be smarter than maybe what these guys were. So he said, we need to reduce expenses. Well, how do you reduce expenses? What he suggested that we do is go look at repairs and maintenance invoices that were over $1,000. So every time a technician came out to Buka to fix an air conditioning unit or a cooler or whatnot, and it cost $1,000, and they put in pieces of equipment and a condenser and all that. He said, go pull all the invoices that are over $1,000, and if they can be turned into an asset, you can call them an asset instead of calling them an expense, a repair and maintenance expense. That's how we're going to get rid of or lower our expenses and increase our net income. And this is a gray area of accounting. It's sort of, there's a lot of, when you take a condenser unit, I don't want to get technical, but if a refrigerator cost $2,500, and the condenser unit is half of that, and that's what you have to get replaced. Was that an expense, or did you effectively buy sort of half a condenser unit? And so I felt comfortable going and pulling all these invoices and cherry picking the ones that I could argue to the auditors and say, yes, I can argue that this should be an asset and the accounting is proper. And so I did it, and I didn't think anything of it. And then probably another quarter went by, and same thing. The controller comes in, hey, we got 1 cent we got to find. It's only 1 cent this quarter, not 3 cents. And so it's much easier to go find it. And that went on, and it went on every quarter. And I remember thinking at the time, like it started to get harder to find that money. And I remember thinking like, okay, I know this is starting to get in the wrong territory. But I also was telling myself, it's short term. It's only going to be this year. I'm going to do this one next time, and then I won't have to do it again. But that wasn't the case. We kept going. And then the last straw in that sort of realm of unethical business practice was the CFO came in one day, and he said, hey John, we need to find $20,000. We need to go dig in the repairs and maintenance. And I said, Greg, there's none left. I'm going to yank as many as I can, and I won't yank any more. There's none over 1,000. And he said, well, lower the level down to 500. You've only been looking at the 1,000 and above. There's got to be stuff in the $500 to $1,000 range. And I thought, okay, I'm definitely doing something wrong now. Because our policy was we wouldn't capitalize anything that was under $1,000. But I did it, and knowing full well that it was the incorrect thing to do, I think back on it, and I try to think, well, why did I do it? And the only thing I could think of is I didn't want to lose my job. I liked it too much. And they were paying me way too much money, and I got to go do whatever I wanted to do, with the games and drinking and whatnot, and I was young. And so why would I want to give this up? And I still felt like this was short term, that it would go away. We're just having a bad year. About 18 months. Eventually, I won't have to go chase these dollars. So that was sort of going on my entire term there. And then sort of the thing that was happening on top of that was expense reports. And when I start to tell you some of this stuff, you're just going to be like, no way. The CFO used to come into my office every 2 weeks, and he would have an envelope. And this is exactly what he would do. He would take his envelope like this, and it would look like a pregnant envelope because it would be chock full of business receipts that were from the CEO, and it was the CEO of California that was sending in his expense report, and it would be between $5,000 and $15,000 every 2 weeks. And I don't know how you spend that much money in doing business stuff. And so the CFO would come in, and he was kind of, like I said, a cartoon. And he would hold it up to his head like that, and it would be sealed. He hadn't even opened it yet. He would hold it up and he'd go, approved. And he'd just throw it on my desk. And then I would open it up and process it, and it would get paid. The receipts were dog grooming, car detailing, ATM receipts. I don't know how many ATMs, like $200, $200. It's housekeeping remodel. And then, it's just on and on and on. It's unbelievable that I actually ended up questioning it because I went to the controller and I said, why is it that they can do have the dog kennel and you have to pay for that? Well, he's traveling out here, he needs to put his dog somewhere. There was always this justification for why it was happening. And they also said that the CFO and the CEO had an agreement that they could expense certain things on the business that other people couldn't do. And I took him at his word, and as the controller, and he was 5 years older than me and sort of been around the block. And so I said, okay. And so that process went on. And then I started to see the CFO's expense reports. And this is what I call the trickle-down unethical economics. Is the CFO then started to submit expense reports, and they would be just as egregious. Family vacations, I would see like the kids would rack up like thousands of dollars. His kids would rack up thousands of dollars of room charges, room service, movies and video games and strip clubs. The guy spent more time at strip clubs than I think he did in Buca working he's like, I come in here twice a year, it's 3,000, it's 3,000. And I think about that relative to the 5,000 to 15,000 the CEO is sending every 2 weeks. So in my mind, I justify it. I'm like, all right. So sure enough, I send it through the AP crew and they cut him a check. And so you can imagine it wasn't long before it was my turn. And I started doing, I was never as bad as they were, but I certainly wasn't the same. I would take my family and friends to Buka all the time and rack up thousands of dollars in charges, and we would comp it. I would fly to Arizona for Thanksgiving to spend time with some friends, and I had them ship. Anybody knows about Magnum wine? It's those huge bottles of wine, really that big. I would have them ship that from the restaurants down to where I was staying, so we could enjoy good Magnum wine when I was there. I would spend a lot of time at like Morton's Steakhouse, and some very expensive steakhouses, $400 or $500. Me and my buddy or me and a coworker, and I would expense that. And what I would do is I would put on my expense report. I would go to the person underneath me, and I would say, this is okay. I want to check the next check run. And it was no big deal. And that sort of went on. I was there for over 2 years, and that's how it was. And it took me, towards the end of the second year, was when Enron and WorldCom, Tyco started to blow up in the news. And I remember thinking, as I'm reading that about this corporate scandal, that this Buka situation is on the path towards and I had sort of abandoned my value system because I was sort of humble, grew up in humble beginnings. I abandoned that for greed, and I began to sort of pull myself away from all the wrongdoings and some, I don't know how, other than maybe it was the Enron stuff that was popping up in the news. But I started to say, like, look, I gotta stop doing what I'm doing. I gotta move on to another company, or I try to get these guys to stop what they're doing. So the very first thing I did is when the controller would say, hey, we need to find 2 cents, I wouldn't do it anymore. I said, I'm not going to take the money anymore. And he was a yes man. He never was on the take. I never saw an expense report from him. But he would always turn, look the other way when everybody else was on the take. And so he said, fine, you don't have to do it, I'll do it. So he started, he was the one looking for the money and booking stuff. Expense reports, I wouldn't do the CEO's expense reports anymore. So he started doing them. And I knew that sort of I call it the house of cards. I knew that it was getting close to crumbling, just because we were continuing to miss that earnings per share by a greater amount. And the sort of the straw that broke the camel's back was the VP of IT came to me one day, and he comes to me with invoices, and it was this invoice from a third-party IT company, and it said August services, $100,000, and I'd seen half a dozen of those, going back to February or whenever, and I didn't think anything of it. But when I sort of started to feel like I needed to scrutinize more and be held accountable to some of my actions, I actually said, what is this $100,000 services that we're paying this IT company? And this was at the time, this is like late 90s, early 2000, where telecom and internet and all that was just starting to blow up. And so you were hearing words, we're buying this and buying that, or creating, the wide area network, the flex capacitor and whatever else. And he said, that's what we're buying. And I didn't have a clue. He's the head of IT. I don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay. Just so long as when the auditors come in 6 months to do their audit, we can substantiate what we're buying, IT-wise. And so process it, no big deal. And a few days later, I was out to the CFO's assistant, who pretty much like any company, there's always one person in the company, and it's usually an admin assistant that knows everything that's going on. And she was the person that I went to, and I said to her, I said, hey, what's that? The third-party IT company? They're in the back. There's like 5 of them. They're working all day long. What are they here for? What are they doing? And she said, well, they're not working on anything for Buka. So that was check 1. She said they're not paying rent. So even though they're back there and using our desks and our computers and whatnot, they're not paying rent. And you should probably dig a little bit. And that was it. And so I immediately started getting nervous and like, what's going on? So I had to drive. So what I decided to do is I was going to drive across town to St. Paul to go to the State Department and pull the articles of incorporation for this third party. And I didn't tell anybody. I was like, yeah, going out for lunch. And I drove over there, and this is pre-internet. Today you can probably just somebody here to have it in 2 seconds, probably. So I had to drive over there and pay the clerk $3 to make me a copy. She makes me a copy of the articles of incorporation. I sit down in the lobby there, waiting area, and I get to page 2, and it lists the owners. And the owners were the CEO of Buka, the CFO of Buka, and the Vice President of IT of Buka, along with half a dozen other people that work for Buka. So they own this third-party IT company that was supposed to be working on Buka stuff, submitting invoices for $100,000 a month for services, but they weren't doing any work. And so basically it was a funnel of money out of Buka into the owner's pockets, or the executive's pockets. So by then I'm like really freaked out. I think it was probably 20 at the time, because I didn't know who to tell. And that was whistleblower laws. And I didn't take any ethics courses. I didn't really know what to do. I decided that out of everybody at Buka, the controller was probably the most trustworthy, because he never ever was on the team. He just looked the other way. He was a buddy of mine. So I went to him and I said, here's everything that I found out on this third-party IT company. And he was just as concerned as I was. I can remember the look on his face still. It was like he saw a ghost. He was so upset and so nervous. And he said, well, let's dig a little bit. The home store says, digest it, and then by Thursday, this is like on Tuesday, by Thursday, if we still feel pretty good that this is clearly something's wrong here, I will go talk to the CFO and confront him. And I said, sounds good. Thursday came, and we said, still feel like there's something here. At the very minimum, they need to disclose a third-party transaction, and it needs to be in all the notes of the financial statements at a bare minimum. So I knew that had to happen because they were affiliated for me. And so he said, yep, at least we're going to get the CFO to admit to that. So he goes off to the office, and about an hour later, I get a phone call saying I'm summoned to the CFO's office, and I'm thinking, like, I felt pretty positive that there was going to be a good outcome. I walk in there, and you sort of expect, where do we read that? It says, have a box. The red one contains a whistle, which you can blow for the SEC. The blue one has a bonus, which you can take home and spend. And that's sort of how I felt. This didn't exactly happen. That's how I felt my existence there, because they were just paying me off, or paying me to look the other way. But I remember when I was thinking I was going to walk into his office, that the CFO was going to be at a desk facing me, that there was going to be the controller who was on my side, and me. Between the two of us, controlling myself, we can convince the CFO to do the right thing. I walk in there, the controller's behind the CFO, so the CFO is right here, so you're walking in, the CFO, the controller's standing behind him, and he's just staring at the floor. And I thought, oh, this isn't going to end well. He wouldn't look me in the eye the entire time. And even I used to think like maybe I'll just write an honest letter to the business finance writer at the Star Tribune. Maybe I'll just go that route. But you know, it would subside, and it happened probably every 6 months. I'd have that weird gut feeling about it, and that went on for a few years. And often what I'd do to appease it is I would call my buddies at Deloitte too. So a lot of them were still working there, and I would run through hypotheticals and be like, so say, you know, I'm seeing expense reports from the CEO that are this, and I see this related party transaction, and inevitably it always get to a point where they would say, look, if you tell me, I know who you're referring to because I know where you used to work. If you tell me more, I'm going to have to go and talk to the partner at Deloitte too. She was on the Google account still. And I'd say, I don't want to go there yet. I don't want to go there yet. Hang up the phone, and 6 months later, I'd find a different friend in Deloitte. And it was sort of my therapy. It was like, I guess that's what it was. And so time elapsed. 2005, I'm sitting having dinner, knock on the door, go to a little hole because nobody likes bothering them at any time of day. It's only on the phone now. And there's this dude, this scraggly little guy, smoking a cigarette, and I'm like, well, this is weird. So I've got the like bolt, the chain bolt thing, and I kind of opened it up, and he's like, John, I got raped. And I said, yeah. And he throws this document through the crack, and he's like, you've been served. And I've never been served before, and I was scared. I was thinking I was somehow being convicted or charged, indicted. And so immediately I'm looking to see BUCA versus, or not BUCA, but SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, versus who? You know, it's like the CEO, the CFO, the VP of IT, the controller, and that was it. And I was like, I mean, I know I took some wine, but I really didn't know. Am I going to end up here in an SEC investigation? So it was a subpoena to give a deposition on BUCA matter. They had figured out, I don't know, to this day I don't know how the SEC figured it out. I've heard sort of rumors about how they did. But I went down, put on my best suit and tie, and went down to the SEC office in Quest Building in Denver. And there's a bunch of lawyers sitting around a table, and they had a video camera going and audio tape. And they just started asking peppering questions. And it was sort of, I thought it was kind of, I remember having like this wry smile because they'd say, okay, this is exhibit, 1A-325, and they'd slide over this piece of paper. And I'd look at it and be like, what is it? Can you tell us what it is? Or tell the camera. I'm like, oh, that's the email I wrote my dad about, the expense reports from the CEO. And they're like, okay, here's the other exhibit. What's this one? Oh, that's the memo that I wrote and sent to my Hotmail account. And I'm like thinking to myself, where the hell did they find it? It was 6 years later that they had these pieces of paper. And it had my resignation letter, and I had to explain why I resigned. Pretty much the story that I'm sharing with you today is this story that I gave to the FCC. And after I walked out of there, this tremendous burden was like off my shoulders. It felt like I was vindicated, or I don't even know what the feeling was, but I felt like, look, I'm done. I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't worry about it. And then shortly thereafter, I got another subpoena. But this time it was a civil suit where BUCA had cleaned house all those guys. We're now suing them, trying to recover as much money that they took out. And so that one was a piece of cake. I mean, as soon as I got that, it was just like, all right, whatever. When's that? Next Tuesday? All right, I'll be there. And when you did it, it was no big deal. And so, that's kind of what happened. And so the aftermath is they all got convicted. They're all felons. They got convicted of securities fraud. CEO spent 13 months in jail. So there's the SEC filed fraud charges against the executives. CEO agrees to pay $500,000 civil penalty. Well, at the end of the day, the CEO, Joe McTrotter, spent 13 months in prison. He had to pay $800,000. Can never work as an executive in a public company again. And the thing that I think is most cool about all this is that he was the first executive to be convicted under Sarbanes-Oxley, which is Sox game from the Enron and the WorldCom, big dogs. But this guy was the first one to be convicted. So, CEO or the CFO, he spent a year in jail, a little over a year, and I had fines of $170,000 if he had to pay back, most of which was strip clubs. I kid you not. It even reads that way, but the big chimney point he had to give back was for family trips and strip clubs. VP of IT, he also was convicted. Didn't have to spend as much time in jail, didn't have confinement. The controller, actually, I think he pled guilty to a misdemeanor, so he won't be on his record, and you know, rightfully so. I mean, he looked the other way. I mean, he was never on the take to the level these guys are. You know, so I put this little joke in there about, you know, some words of wisdom. Crime doesn't pay, however, business crime does. And you know, I mean, some people feel that way. I don't know about spending a year in jail. I don't think you know for taking what they took, and I know that they ended up screwing a lot of shareholders and pretty much taking down Luca, who ended up going bankrupt and Hollywood bottom. But to spend a year in jail, I wouldn't want to do that. Fined $800,000. His reputation's ruined. I used to read a lot of trade journals. In fact, that's why I get so ashamed. So when I was working at News, I'd read trade journals and I'd see this Joe McIntyre was going to speak here at this conference, and I'd be like, you know, if only they knew, type of thing. So he no longer does any of that. CFO ended up, he fell. It was sort of this weird deal. He had this medical accident. It's like karma's a bitch. I mean, he fell. He was permanently like cut this lip and his stroke became. The VP of IT ended up getting a divorce. He lived in Los Angeles, he lived in a small little apartment, and having trouble finding a job. So, you know, I think that they got their due to some degree. So that's sort of the story. Now, just to sort of talk about the lessons, you know, how did it happen? You probably read this in all your classes. I mean, the culture allowed it to happen. And that's sort of top down. You know, the CEO does it, the CEO can do it, and then on down the line. The SEC folks were quoted saying basically that you know, the executive suite was just ripe with this, you know, the wrongdoing and allowing this to happen, and they looked the other way and didn't care. Hubris is another. If you haven't heard that used in ethics, it's another big one, and that's just ego. I mean, these guys never ever think that they're doing anything wrong. The CEO is, you know, putting in his dog kennel expense reports. When he was interviewed about it prior to he pled guilty, he said it was just a difference of circumstances or happenstance. You know, that the SEC has it wrong. And it's like, how can you really sit there and believe that you're entitled? It's an entitlement thing. How can you sit there and think that you're entitled to have shareholders, which are a public company, paying for all that garbage? I mean, it's just unfathomable to me. And it wasn't just Trotto. It was Kenneth Lay at Enron. I mean, he says that he admits that he should, he has full responsibility, but at the end of the day, he doesn't think he did anything wrong. And that's laughable. He was convicted. He didn't serve any time because he died right before his sentencing. The funny one to me is the Bernie Evers, who is the guy who started WorldCom, CEO of WorldCom. He's like, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, and I don't know technology, accounting, or finance. It's like, how can you be CEO of a technology company and not know any of that stuff? And then the last one is the Greg Dell, who's the CFO. When we were sitting across from each other at the table, and him basically telling me, you don't know what you're talking about. And it turns out he was wrong. So hubris is a scary thing. My lessons learned. It is what it is. Deep down, I sort of knew that it was wrong, and I allowed myself to be convinced, or allowed myself to be convinced otherwise. And so I think that everybody here is smart enough to look at a particular case, and especially the case I just presented. You're probably like, well, no kidding, John, of course that's wrong. But it's not that easy. It's a very slippery slope, especially with money involved, sort of inexperience. So in don't forget where you come from and who you are. And that's about values. And we're all sort of brought up in American society in general, help each other and good people in general. So don't lose sight of that. The FBI. Oh, work at companies. That's a good one. Work at companies that you share the same value system. When you get further up the chain, it's not so much about them interviewing you as you need to start interviewing them. And it wasn't so much that case when I went to Newell, but certainly at Matt Green's, I spent more time interviewing them about sort of the culture and what they wanted to do, what their long-term was. It all about money, and that type of thing. And I ended up landing. Matt Green's a great culture. Those guys are honest as the day is long. Same at Newell's and Company. Newell's and Company, the CEO and founder, he didn't want vendors who gave Broncos tickets and Rockies tickets and Nuggets and all these perks. They didn't want that going to the person that that had the relationship. So he enforced a rule where everything went into a pool. And so you get tickets to the Broncos, it would go in a pool. Anybody that wanted to go to the game would send an email, and they would do a drawing. So anybody in the entire company could get to go to the tickets. I thought that was fantastic. The other lesson, FBI can image it here. It's shocking. They figured out what computer I had. So it was already repurposed. Somebody else was using it. Figured out which one was mine, and we're able to extract those documents 6 years later. It's just mind-blowing to me. And then my favorite quote is from Gandhi: "There's sufficiency in the will for a man's need, but not for the greed." Greed, you need greed. You can't have capitalism. If you believe in capitalism, you can't have it without greed. There's levels of it, and it just the dial just can't be turned up too high on the greed factor. But greed is going to exist in every aspect of business because unless you're even working for nonprofits, you're working for money. The gentleman that was at NPR, he counts on that money coming in. So don't allow yourselves to get caught up in the money factor. It will ruin your lives. It has ruined many lives. So that's pretty much it. So that's all I have. You can do Q&A. I've got my email address if you want to email me. You're welcome to do so. Love feedback on how to improve it. If you're interested in reading, the SEC is kind of interesting to read if you're kind of looking at the SEC stuff. You can just Google SEC. I say incentivized Q&A. Everybody's probably anxious for food. I have free salad cards. It's kind of a bribe, so maybe not quite. But I'm not going to walk around and give them to you. So I'm going to have to trust you that after this is done, we go eat. We're going to eat or after this session. If you had a question, say, hey, I had a question, we get one of these. It's for Matt Green's free salad. Closest one, we have 2 of them in 4 columns. So questions? Yes, sir.
So, how did the auditors miss some of this? Was it just because they were looking, were they not confident?
They're in too tight. And so since Sarbanes-Oxley makes you rotate off as a partner, it'll make you rotate off. The other thing is you can no longer, I think I was the first, I remember doing some research on the Hopewell case. You can no longer be on a client and then end up going to work for that client without there being a sort of time period away from. So if I was at Deloitte Touche and I wanted to work at Buca, I couldn't anymore because I was on the case. So if I was pulled off of Buca for a period of I think 1 or 2 years, but they were so in tight, and auditing has become a commodity where anybody can give you an audit. There's a set rules and procedures that you follow. It's how much does it cost, and how much are you going to help me? And so they became extremely close with the CFO, the partners, the law firm, and the so that's kind of how it happened. And the CFOs, I mean, he's wicked smart. He would slide a hand and tell them stuff. Any other questions? Sorry.
If you had it to do over again, would you quit sooner?
No. If I had it to think it was a valuable learning experience, and I think today, if I had to do it today, I think the whistleblower thing allowed me to go to the auditors, which before I didn't feel like I could go to the auditors because they were sort of in bed with the CFO. Any questions?
Do you think Luca failed because of the top of the officers, or do you think they would have failed regardless, even if they would have had ethical loss?
I think that they ran into, the recession just like anybody. The restaurants took a toll during the recession. People weren't eating out, weren't going to families out. So I think they had a hard time anyway. But you talk about just looking at some of the, I was talking about recapitalizing those repairs and maintenance expenses and moving all that expense over to asset. $12 million in how much we moved over the course of 3 years. They expense $850,000 in ATMs, $150,000. There's $1 million was that third party. $1 million in aggregate was that third party transaction. So all that money, I don't think that it necessarily sunk them, but it certainly didn't help them. In the back.
Yeah, have you been in contact with any of those executives since the first second?
Now, the controller and I did I think we hooked up on LinkedIn, sort of bury the hatchet type of thing. But that's it. I don't keep in touch with him.
Do you think if you had had an ethics day, the situation would have turned out differently for you?
I think it would have helped me with understanding that it was wrong quicker. But then again, money blinds people. So I like to think that it would have. It's certainly learning about the whistleblower rules and laws certainly would have gave me enough confidence to be able to go tell somebody and feel like something was going to get resolved. And that just didn't exist then. Any other questions?
Outside of the Boothbin case, do these guys get in trouble for their third-party IT program as well?
Well, everybody that was on the other gentlemen that were part of that third party, they also got indicted. And so they, I don't know, there's 3 of them that ended up with the same sort of deal, going to jail or getting convicted of a felony. Yeah.
Was this a common thing that happened in companies, or was it just more of a
Well, it seemed common at the time. It seemed like you couldn't pick up a Wall Street Journal without reading about some company. CNBC has an American read, and it's not like it stops today. It's still continued. I don't think it's the magnitude that it was. It was a bit Wild West, I think, back then until regulation came in. And so, regulation, I used to complain about Sarbanes-Oxley being too overly regulating companies. And, they tore down Arthur Andersen, all those Arthur Andersen just went to Deloitte and Ernst & Young. So they all made a lot more money because it's being funneled into 3 companies now instead of 4. So who did it really hurt? It hurts a lot of small businesses. But at the end of the day, if internal controls are in place now, a lot of places they weren't before. So I think that we're in a much better place